Good afternoon. My name is James Wheathunga, and I am going to be disassembling and reassembling a personal computer for Unit 401 IT Technical Skills. Before we get started, I will show you some of the basic tools that I will be using. I'll be using a magnetic tip screwdriver. I'll also be using an anti-static wrist strap. Before we get started, we must ensure that we have no power connected to our PC that we're going to be working on. Now we must ground ourselves correctly to the unit before we begin. To ensure we have a proper grounding, it is advised, from what we have seen on the internet, to plug the PC in, but make sure that the power is actually switched off at the wall. This is to ensure we get our proper grounding. Great, now let's get started. The first thing I will be doing would be disconnecting the power from the motherboard and all the components. The next thing I'll be doing will be disconnecting all the hard drive, SATA cables and power supplies. With all that aside now, we can actually start connecting all the other wires for the front control panel, the USBs, and the system fan. As you can see, I have my anti-static strap on, earthed through the PC plug into the wall. I've ensured that the unit is off while I'm doing this. Never work with your unit plugged in and actually live. You've got 240 volts going through here, and it can actually kill you. Although it's actually all comes down to probably 6-7 volts at the end of it, but you never take that chance, never take that risk. Now we have everything disconnected. What I am going to do now is actually unplug the system fan, unscrew the system fan. So turn this around. Unplug the VGA cord. My next step is to remove the hard drive, or hard drive caddy. So our hard drive caddy here. It's got a couple of hard drives in. One's actually a main one and one's a slave one for the actual course that we're doing. Got a 500 gigabyte hard drive that's strictly for the 401 course, and this one here is actually for the system, so I don't lose anything. What I'm going to do now is remove the CD-ROM drives from up the front here. Although I don't use it, although I don't really use CD-ROMs anymore, everything's all through USB and through terabytes and that. This one's removing our DVD-ROM. It's like I said, I don't use it anymore. If I need to boot anything up for the operating system, I'll just use a USB. Use the USB. The next thing I am going to do is I'm going to remove the front USB headers in the front here. cut, cable tie. It's an old media pocket drive, don't use that anymore. It's our front USB headers. Next thing I am going to remove is the PCIe card, just an old Ethernet card. Then we'll get started on the motherboard and then the power supply. Just turn it around so you can see it. PCI card. So the old dial-up. It's the old dial-up Ethernet cord. Next thing we're going to remove is the actual motherboard. Just going to remove the motherboard and then do our power supply last, because if we try to take our power supply out now, we'll run the risk of damaging our motherboard. So it's good practice to actually remove the motherboard first. But I'll have to reposition the actual PC so it's actually on the ground. So it's lying flat rather. 6 screws. Now we have our motherboard disassembled from our case. We're going to now pull out the power supply. Here we have our power supply removed from our case. Here is our empty PC case. Everything removed now. To show you some of the components. On the motherboard. Here we have our RAM. Here we have our RAM sticks. Here we have our RAM. 2 slots of RAM. 2 slots of RAM. 2 slots of RAM. And our main motherboard. Just show you the motherboard. Still got our CPU hooked up. Didn't want to remove it, but I might just take it off and give it a wee bit of a clean while I'm at it. Hasn't been done for a while. And when you're doing something like this, it's imperative that everything lines up when it goes back in, because the screws go right through, and they are mounted on these risers inside the case. And when we screw them back in, we'll just disconnect our CPU fan from the motherboard. Just disconnect our CPU fan from the motherboard. That's better. It's nice and firm, nice and firm. And here is one complete disassembled motherboard. One complete disassembled motherboard. It is a Intel MSI motherboard. It's actually a dual core, 4 gig of RAM dual core. It has got a 250 gigabyte hard drive, and it has got another 500 gigabyte hard drive, which is running on a 250 watt power supply. Now that we've actually pulled everything apart, as you can see, just a completely disconnected motherboard, I will go through the process of installing all the components back into the case.